Hello again, this is Aristoy Garage doing a follow-up from the previous video where the battery actually ran out on the camera. But you can see inside the patch panel for the lower part of the quarter panel on the passenger side was welded in, and I primed it. There is one pinhole I can see that he'll have to fix that. And here's the weld drop. I'm going to be putting seam sealer in there where it meets up with the drop for the trunk pan, the quarter patch panel. Somehow I have to get in there. And we'll seam seal everything. Now on the driver's side, it's basically the same thing, but I did not put seam sealer or primer on it, not yet, because he didn't finish welding this part of the car. You can see the inner. He didn't do the inner welds yet. Those weld points that are coming through are from the outer part of the weld for the lower patch panel on the driver's side. And here's the outer portion of it. He still has to weld that. That is not welded completely yet. That's like the next thing he'll do when the welder comes here. We have that tack welding done. This is the driver's side lower patch panel. It did very good work. It needs to have a lot of grinding done to make it flush as possible for the bodywork. Now this is where the patch panel connects to the contour of the tail panel of the car. Actually, at one point I had to create a porta power and push out this portion of the car a little bit. And some of the welds were broken in the process of doing that, but he welded it very securely. And you can see the plug hole weld holes that were drilled in the patch panel. And those are formed and lined up perfectly. So when he welds them in, this whole driver's side quarter panel patch panel will be very secure, very structurally sound. And if you can see in there, the lower part of the outer wheel housing for the driver's side still has to be welded in. Now I fabricated plates for this purpose. I'll show you those. This is some welding that somebody else did on the car. It's not the original lower portion of the outer wheel housing, but we're going to weld to that here, and I created all the holes, as you can see here. That's going to hold that fabricated panel into place. So this car will require some significant body work. there is the lower portion of the wheel housing fabricated piece that I made. He'll weld that in and it'll contribute to the structural strength of the whole lower portion of the quarter panel. And these weld holes are going to represent plug welds that are going to attach to the metal in the lower portion of the outer wheel housing. And I drilled the holes in it. That'll connect to the wheel housing. And it should be very good. It should be very strong. And this bared metal piece here, that's going to be formed more correctly to the flange under the outer wheel housing. And I created a piece of metal which is here. That will go on the very bottom like so, so that when it's all welded he can create bridge weld, and it'll keep dirt and road salts and whatnot, just about anything, water, from getting in there and rusting out the lower portion of the outer wheel housing again. One of the techniques that we used was the end caps to the spoiler, which is on the 1970 Mustang Fastback. And we connected it to the car, and that was used as a guide to forming and aligning the patch panel itself. As you can see, the curvature down here lines up perfectly with the lower patch panel, and this space here is actually going to be for the bumper when the bumper gets mounted, and it'll cover this portion here. So that was a guide, a template that we used to forming the patch panel on the quarter panel on both sides of the car. That was rather important because we had no other reference to go by, and we were able to form the patch panel to what height on the front and the back. This is the back portion. You can see he did tack welding, and that's the front. So depending on the end cap for the spoiler, for the outer portion of the car, the tail panel, we were able to shift this quarter panel either up or down, and that mattered on how it measured out in the back of the car. So we knew we were spot on. We were perfect. It came out very nicely. He will finish welding it and putting in the piece of metal that I formed for the lower wheel housing, and then it'll be ready to go for body work on this car. Let me show you the inside again. I don't know if you can see it. There are a couple pinholes there that are shown through. But that needs to be welded next. The inner portion of the patch panel is going to weld to the rest of the quarter panel very nicely. I'll put a bead that'll weld this whole section in place, and it'll be strong, as strong as the passenger side. And then I'm gonna put seam sealer in the wheel drop, the wheel housing drop there, and it'll weld the bottom of it. We have clamps on there now, but you can see the holes that I drilled in the patch panel that are for plug welds. I'm going to weld this patch panel to the drop portion. And that was it. I had it on zoom and it got blurry, but it's all very good. We're going to get the tail lights reinstalled. We're actually going to be doing wiring for the whole car through the firewall to the engine compartment to the back of the car, and all these light fixtures and the sending unit for the trunk for the gas tank, which will fit in there. We're going to have new wiring, a complete new wiring harness for this car. I'm going to route to the back of the car the necessary wires. Let me show you the bottom portion of the quarter panel, patch panel again, without the zoom. I don't think it's mattering too much. Okay, now you can see it. We have the clamp there holding it in, and you can see the holes for the plug welds. And there's excess. This is a reproduction trunk pans from Mustangs Unlimited, and when the trunk pans were installed properly inside the car, the ledge appears when we mounted the quarter panel patch panel, but we know that that's positioned perfectly up here following the end cap for the spoiler of the car. You see that? So there is excess right here. You can see it. The metal was bared, so we can plug weld the holes I created in the patch panel. But all this excess has to be cut off. And I checked and made sure it was correct. It is. There are actual holes in the trunk pan, the drop off of the trunk pan into the wheel, the trunk well, and they're necessary. That's per design of the reproduction for this car. They're necessary, and you have to put grommets and plugs in those holes. Presumably, if the car became submerged, you can undo the plugs and the water would drain out. Other than that, I don't know the purpose of having factory holes drilled into the drop-off. The same thing on this side. This side's completely welded. You can see the excess right here. That's the patch panel for the quarter panel on the passenger side. And there's excess, which is no problem. We'll cut that off. And when we do the body work and get it perfectly trimmed, and here again we have the trunk pans that were welded in per specs. And there's a flange right there that held the seat upriser into the trunk pans, and on this side as well. You can see it there. But these trunk pans were properly installed, so the excess will be welded cut off, and that's about it. There's a piece of metal that goes in here, gets welded to the trunk pan. That's for the spare tire lockdown. And we have the lockdown piece and the old U-shaped piece of metal that will be welded to the trunk pan. Alright. And I put primer on the seat pedestal, around the seat pedestal. I'll probably end up putting truck bed coating on that to make sure it never rusts. On the underside of the seat pedestal, I applied the truck bed coating, which was very significant. It'll keep it from rusting from the inside out. And the holes, after the seats are mounted on both sides, the holes in the floor pan will have its own plugs, grommet-like plugs, to keep water from splashing up, causing a horrible situation. And here's the Sanco plates again. One thing we did forget to do, which I'm rather annoyed at, is there's a split here, a crack in the shock tower on the driver's side. It's only one crack, but it needs to be properly fixed. The way you do that is you use a 1/8 inch drill bit and you drill on the ends. See, on the top here and on the bottom, and then you create a well for the weld material, and it welds it. It fixes that whole shock tower. But the problem is, that's annoying, is now I can't progress with the building of the front suspension. The steering mechanism and all the links, the center link, the tie rods, and the springs, because we had ordered new high-performance springs for racing springs that'll add tremendous structural geometry to the front end of this car. And hopefully with that and the Sanco plates on both sides will keep the shock tower from shifting and cracking and denting itself and distorting. And we have new bushings for the strut rods from Scott Drake. And there goes the remounting of the steering gearbox. We're not ready to bolt it in yet. It's a difficult process. When I started tearing this car apart for the restoration, one of the things that was difficult to do was to keep track of all the bolts. Believe it or not, you go this far and you're stuck because you don't know which bolts go to where, with washers and nuts, and the diameter of the threads of the bolts, whether they're fine or coarse. So I tried writing everything down here. It gives me some reference. Depends, like this is the rear end suspension, for example, and I got the RS-1, and we have listed all the wires and gaskets and crown bolts and all kinds of stuff. But it's been years from doing this that it's hard to figure out what bolt and washer and nut goes where anymore on this car, because I want to do it right. And I'll show you back here, we're getting set up for the front steering suspension of the car, the 1970 Mustang fastback. And here are the strut rods. I cleaned them off rather well. Still yet to finish cleaning them. Then they're going to be painted with a high gloss Rust-Oleum or a chassis paint from Harbor Freight. Here's one of the lower control arms. In the next few days we're going to be starting to mount all of this hardware to the front of the car. One thing the owner of the car did was order kits, bolt kits, from Classic Industries. And there's a complete master body kit and there's a complete chassis kit. And we're hoping, it's expensive. It was rather expensive. It was $350 somewhat for the body kit, which is a box of bolts and nuts and washers basically, that is specifically designed reproduction for restoring a car like this. And he ordered also the chassis kit, the master chassis kit, which hopefully all the bags are labeled and you'll know exactly what bolts and nuts and types of washers go where. That would be extremely helpful. It's good to get all new bolts anyway, but the chassis kit, for example, costs like $400. You see the inside there, the firewall. I'm going to be mounting the dash soon. And the brake mechanism. This car is being converted from a 4-speed manual transmission that had a clutch in it to an automatic C6 transmission that has the wider brake pedal with no clutch pedal. So we actually ordered on eBay and received the apparatus that holds the clutch pedal, not the clutch pedal, the brake pedal, and that will be installed soon. And also the steering column. So we will be progressing nicely now that we're getting the welding done. We're starting to wrap up with that. And that's it for today's video. Follow-up video on welding that we had done a couple days ago. Again, this is Aristoid Garage with the 1970 Mustang Fastback Restoration Project. Thank you very much for being with us. Hit the like button if you like this video. And there will be more videos to follow.